Hello, and welcome back to the How to Build a Team podcast with Pam and David. On this week's episode, we are going to talk about setting expectations right with your remote team. And it's can be a bit of a challenge for some people. A lot of times people will hire a freelancer, whether they're a virtual assistant or a graphic artist or a designer, whatever they happen to be, and have unrealistic expectations of what kind of work or the productivity of that person is going to be. So we thought we'd just chat about that a little bit on this week's episode and help you to be able to set good expectations for your team or for your project, whatever it might be, kind of keep you on the right path and hopefully out of a realm of frustration over what's going on. So let's start that off, Pam.
Yeah, so, from my experience in working remotely, I've got some, feedback from previous clients and from the clients that I've worked with in the past that they're kind of like frustrated with the outcome of a certain task. And for you to know why are you frustrated about the outcome, it boils down to setting or defining your expectations, really. So let's talk about that first. How do you define expectations? Let me ask you that, David. From, as let's kind of like have a role play here. Let's say you're the client and I am the freelancer. I mean, how do you define your expectation when you assign a task to a freelancer? How do you set your expectation in, realistic expectation? We are talking about, having realistic expectations.
Right. Well, most of the tasks that I assign to my virtual team I do have some recurring things, and we'll talk about those in just a second, but I do a lot of kind of one-off tasks or special tasks. And the first thing that I have to determine before I even begin to assign that to my team is I have to know what is my expected outcome from this. What do I want to achieve in doing this? I can't just say, hey, I need you to do this. There needs to be a little bit of context. There needs to be a little bit of spacing as to exactly what this is and what it's about. And one was I had some database work that I needed done a couple of weeks ago. I was transferring a bunch of information from one database program or online program that I was using. And I wanted to back up all that data and transfer it over to a new platform. And so as part of my end goal was to have my data migrated from A to B. And in chatting with my team, I set up the expectations and kind of the steps. And it might seem to some people out there that, if I've got to go through all these steps so specifically and step A and step B and step C, I might as well just do it myself. And that's a subject for a whole other episode we can do. But if you don't have the expectations of what exactly you need done, if it's a recurring task, you might have to explain it once or twice in the beginning, and then your team should be able to take that over. But this was a new task, one-off thing. And I basically just laid it out. I need you to back up this database, do an export in this format, go into the new database, upload it, set the fields for the formatting, and then import it. It was a pretty basic thing, but my expectation was that it would be everything migrated to the new system. But I had to break that down just a little bit in between. I had to define what the different expectations were along the way, that they would back up the database, that they would, so we would have a copy set up. So if there was a problem with the upload or a problem with the download, that we'd still have everything there. And it's being realistic in what can be accomplished. The other thing in expectations is a time frame. I wasn't in a big hurry for this, but if I just left it without a deadline,
without a due date.
So I set what I thought was a realistic expectation for a deadline was a couple of working days. And it ended up getting done even sooner than what I had set as a deadline.
Expected, yeah.
It was a fairly small task and it went very smoothly, so it wasn't all that big of a deal. So it's really just, you have to know yourself, what your end goal is, if there's any specific steps or milestones along the way to achieving that. And then in this case, or most cases, is having a realistic due date when the work can actually be finished.
Yeah.
It's not fair to unload on somebody and say, hey, I need this, and this done, and I need it done in, tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
It has to be realistic, otherwise you're just setting yourself and your team up for failure. And that's really no different than working with a physical employee in your office.
Yeah.
You have to have realistic timeframes, and the work has to be within the scope of what their experience or expertise is.
True. You know what? When we come up with this topic because of experiences that we've had, I kind of it's funny for me because I know it's going to branch out to many different other things that we can talk about for probably for a few weeks ahead, for those people who didn't know how I started as a freelancer. So setting the right expectations, it's kind of for me, it's funny to talk about because I can speak from a freelancer's point of view and I can speak from a client's point of view. So, when I was working as a freelancer, it's challenging when I have a client that will give me a certain task without a deadline, but it's rare. But I've learned through many years of experience, I've learned that you also need to learn to know your clients. So if the clients clients don't give you the due date, then of course you should be able to deliver regardless there's a due date or none. But you have to figure out how long this task will last. And some instructions are not very clear. So that's when, the client perspective is, you have to, when you give an instruction to your freelancer, you have to be clear in what you want to do. It can't be vague. And then you will be frustrated once you get the outcome. So it's you really, like what you said, David, you really have to define your expectations. If this is something that is repetitive, then a step-by-step clear instruction will be great to have. If it is a more complex task, then probably putting a step-by-step instruction with a video or with a screen share video to the VA or to whoever needs to do the task. So really defining the expectation eliminates the frustration, and then setting the realistic expectation, having a time frame, a deadline really helps. Because if you don't give a deadline, it's an open task, then that task can be done in a month's time.
Yeah, that's no different than having physical staff in your office. You have to have
things need to be deadline.
Yeah.
And you have to be clear because a virtual assistant or whoever's in your team, they can't read your mind. If you say this needs to get done this way because blah blah blah, then you have to be really clear with that. And in that way, the outcome, you'll be happy with the outcome, and the freelancer will know exactly what to do. It's just giving the right instruction, the right direction, so that you'll have the right outcome. Yeah.
And I think the final step in setting expectations is, like anything, you have to measure it once it's over.
Mm-hmm.
Again, if it's a recurring task, the first couple of times that it happens might take a little longer. There might be a couple of errors,
Mm-hmm.
but over the course of 2 or 3 or 4 times of the repetitive task being done, you've got to expect it to be done within a certain time frame, very specifically, and error free, or as close to error free as is possible. And for one-off tasks, again, you have to look back and did everything meet your expectations, even if it's a small project.
Mm-hmm.
To take those wins, you need to compliment your staff for getting things done quickly and on time and properly. And it helps you to measure as you go forward how much responsibility or how much direction your freelancers or your team need going forward. If they've got experience in the type of business that you're doing already, they can probably move forward with less information up front and just the expectation of, this is what I need done, this is when I need it finished by, and move forward with that. It doesn't have to be an all-encompassing going through and rehashing a 1 hour long task. It's a matter of keeping up with letting your staff know what you want, passing on your compliments or your issues if things go right or don't go right, and then moving forward and evaluating that as you go on.
Yeah. And it needs to be documented. I think, documenting your task is like another step for you to be able to measure your success. And you will also know, if you're gonna do that same task again after a month, after 2 months, you don't want to repeat yourself explaining how you want that things done. So you know what, having like a standard operating procedure is very important in doing a business. You don't have to repeat yourself again and again, especially if you are working with a remote team. There will be freelancers that will come and go, so it will save you time, and documentation will help you measure success. And this will, the tools that you're going to use will help. With us, we are using Asana for project management tools, and that is where I measure things. If this is getting done properly, if I can see there are back and forths and a team member is getting stuck, with whatever she's doing, then I'll be able to see. And that's how I measure. That's how we scale. And, when you see that there are like 5 threads already, back and forth, then you have to go back to the first step. Were you able to define your expectations right? If it's not being delivered on time, then have you set a realistic expectation? If it's a simple task, then maybe a 24-hour turnaround time is realistic. If it is, complicated, what type of task you are giving to your team. And now that I am a business owner, and when I give tasks, I kind of I still have that thinking. If I am the freelancer, will I be able to finish this within 24 hours? Will I be able to finish this in 2 days? Is 2 days realistic for the freelancer to work on this specific task? So I go back to my experience and give my team member the realistic due date. So those are the things that you can keep in mind. If you don't have a project management tool, or you're just using a spreadsheet or a Word document or an email, that can be chaotic over time, especially if your business is growing. You really need to invest in your tools, because that is how you're going to assign and define your expectations, set a due date, and then you'll be able to communicate that expectation. And that is where you will be able to measure your success. So keeping those in mind, I know, like what I said earlier, this topic can branch out to many different other topics. It's not just about setting the right expectation, but it's also about being a good leader and, giving the proper way of, how do you call this? Giving a clear instruction to your team members. So it will not create confusion. It will not create delay. It will not create back and forth communication because the expectation was not right. So exactly. Yeah, so those are the things that I've learned in the past for being a freelancer and now being a business owner. I kind of like, I have that moment wherein I will be thinking, oh, okay, if I am a freelancer, how am I going to do this? If I am the one, if I'm taking this task, how would I want the client to give me the instruction? So I'm kind of like making myself aware of those things so that when I assign a task to the team member, it's clear. Sometimes I don't do, there will be times that I kind of like, because I'm doing this for over 10 years already. So when I assign a task, I'm thinking, okay, this is simple, but you have to remember that because you're doing this for a long time already, that your team member will be able to get it right away. You still have to consider their experience. A clear instruction is really the key, defining expectation and realistic expectation. That is the key to having a successful outcome of whatever project that you're going to have.
All right.
Yeah.
So just to recap our major points for this episode. First one is defining your expectations to yourself, laying out what you want done in the project, making sure the expectations are realistic. Your time frames, is the task, is the employee, the person appropriate for the task, or the task appropriate for the person, as part of just making sure everything's realistic. You have to communicate those expectations to your team or to your freelancer, whoever they may be. If you haven't communicated effectively what those tasks are, you're not going to get the goal that you want. You're not going to reach if you haven't communicated that. And the final step, and the one that so often gets missed, is measuring your success. It's, did this go well? And I said, you don't have to spend an hour rehashing a 15-minute task, but just to yourself, did this project go? Did it happen in the time that I wanted? Was the end result what I wanted? Could I have done it any differently or any more efficiently? And making sure that you're reviewing that. And as you get more experience with your team, you work together more, you understand how each other works. This whole 4-step process will become much more streamlined in itself, and to the point where it just automatically is done and communicated without having to go through a formal thing.
Yeah.
All right. If you found this episode helpful and entertaining, leave us a comment in the comment section below the podcast here. We love hearing from our listeners and taking their suggestions or answering their questions anytime we can. Obviously, you found our podcast somewhere, so thank you for that. Make sure you click on subscribe so you get us every week. And if you're wanting to find out more information about Great Work Online or about Pam or myself, our website is the best place to do that, and that is greatworkonline.com.
All right. That's it for now, and we will catch you again on the next episode. Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.